Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we are going to compare the configuration file in text mode and also the configuration file that we will get from using the API request that's in JSON format. So, without wasting much time, I will just execute terminal length 0 on the Cisco CSR 1000V. It's their cloud hosted router. So, then I do show run. So, I have the full configuration of the Cisco router over here. So I'll scroll up, then we start to do the comparison. Okay, so it starts from here. Now I have Postman here, so I'm going to send a request to get the configuration file in a JSON format. Okay, so there we go. So without wasting much time, let me bridge my screen. Okay, so I have my Postman over here. Good. So scrolling up, I'll start from the configuration file, the head of the configuration file. So in the text mode, or let's say when we have the configuration in plain text, like as we see over here, now you can read everything. So, for example, we have the version, we have the service, and we have the platform. Now, when we send the query to the API, the RESTconf API on the Cisco CSR 1000V, we get this response. And as you can see clearly from here, these things, these outputs are very similar, just that they differ based on how they are structured. So, for example, we start off with the version. So the version here we have 6.9. And then in JSON, this is an object, and then the object has properties. And for each property, we need a validation. So, for example, the entire structure we have here is an object. And then what we have here is a property of that particular object. And then the property of the object has a validation. It has to be a string. So that's how JSON works. So we are working with data types with this particular format. So we have the response here representing a string. So in a programmable way, this is how we understand the data returned from the device. And now we scroll down to let's look for host name. So okay, so let's go on to service. So as you can see, we have two service here: service timestamp, service timestamp. We have the debug, we have the log. So let's search from here. So we have service, and there we go. So now you can see service timestamp from here. And now look at how JSON structured the data returned from the device with respect to the service. So here we have service timestamp, and here we have service timestamp. But here, this particular timestamp that we have over here happens to be a property of this particular object. Okay, so within this property of the entire configuration file, which is presented as an object, we have another property inside. So we have a nested data over here. So as we saw over here, we have timestamp, and under timestamp we have two values. So we have debug, we have log, and as you can see, we have debug over here, and then we have log over here. So instead of having multiple lines and in the text file, that's how we get it. Multiple lines of configuration pertaining to a particular property of the configuration file. Here we have nested data, or let's say nested structures for a particular data returned from the device through the API. So now let's look for something more complex. So let's go to DHCP pool. And in text file, you see IP DHCP pool. We have the DHCP pool over here. And then you can see the indentation over here. So the indentation is a bit of deviation from the starting point of the main configuration. So this is the IP DHCP pool, and we have the DHCP pool configuration defined over here. Okay, so now let's search for this particular keyword. So we go back to JSON. Now we search for it. Now this is an endpoint. Okay, so in API request we use endpoints, and every endpoint gives you a new or something, a path within the configuration file. So we have Cisco DHCP pool, which falls under the IP path. So, for example, if I'm to add a backslash and type IP and send the request again, I'm going to get all IP services which are configured on this particular device. So this shows you that with APIs, we are dealing with path. Okay, so now we have all IP services on this device. And as you can see, we have the IP DHCP pool defined over here. We have IP domain, which all fall under the IP services on the router. So you see how JSON structures the data for us, making it more simple to understand and more structured. Okay. So instead of having IP DHCP pool defined over here, we have IP domain name, which is the DNS. Here is quite different. And here, so we have the end bar services. Here is quite different. Here is structured under IP endpoint, where we have all the properties falling under the IP endpoint. So as you can see, we have domain name, we have DHCP. We are going to go over this. We're going to configure this, and we will get to know more about it. This is just an overview of how the data is structured and the path within the configuration files. So we have a lot. We have IP route over here. We have IP SCP, which is a secure copy. We have SSH, and let me see if I can find SSH from here. So SSH, and as you can see, do I find a SSH? Okay, so this is SSH over here. So under SSH, we have the key name is defined over here. We have the version, and then we have the IP secure server enabled, and as you can see, it's enabled over here. And a whole lot of things that we can do. So let's check for access list. So let's say access list. So we have access list over here. We have IP access list, which falls under the IP endpoint, where we have all the IP services as a property of that IP endpoint. So there we go. So we have IP access list. We have standard. So right from here, we have standard. We have SNMP access. Can we see that? Okay, that is it. Then the rule is sequence 10. We have sequence 10. Then we are permitting any. And as you can see over here, also we have extended also over here. So let's check for extended. How many items? And here, this is another data type. So you can see the square bracket indicating that we have a list. So we have multiple items in that particular list. And as you can see, for extended, we have NAT, we have NAT ACL, and we have the extended control. So let's search for it. We have NAT as the first one, NAT ACL as the second one. Then we have the NAT control here. So basically, it's just like the text file, but then here we are using endpoints to find um, the output of the configuration, or particularly search for any um, path within the configuration file based on what we are looking for. So now let's scroll up to see interfaces. So let me change the endpoint. So I'll go to, let's say, interfaces. Okay, I think I got the path wrong. And as you can see, key path not found. So let me use interface to see. Okay, and there we go. So we have the gigabyte internet interface. Gigabyte Ethernet, sorry. So let's search for gigabyte. and IP address. We have the gigabyte here. And as you can see here, we have the indentation under the gigabyte ether one. So we have all the configuration defined here. Don't touch me as the description. It's the same thing apply here. So based on the number of interfaces we have on the device. So here we have how many interfaces? One, two, three. Now these interfaces can be grouped as one element. So here we have gigabyte Ethernet, right? Then with the data type, it's a list. So with the list, we are using a square bracket over here. So, or we can say an array. So an array, we have multiple items which can be iterated over. So we have one as the ether one. You can see the description, the IP address, everything is detailed over here. The next one is two, configured by resconf. So let's see the description, configured by resconf. Okay. Now let's see the next one, which is test description. As you can see over here, same thing applies here. So let's see if we can find any routing protocol configured on it. So let's search for OSPF. Um, okay, so we have OSPF. So let's see how we can find OSPF. So okay, so let me just give a rough path to see if we can find something. So I'll use router as the endpoint. And of course, router works. So we have router, and then the router, we have different configurations on the router, or we have different path or under the router endpoint. You can have OSPF, you can have BGP, you can have ISIS, you can have EIGRP, or any other um, configuration that you can find under the router path or the router endpoint. So here we have OSPF over here, and it's clearly defined over here. So we have OSPF, and then the ID is 10. So we have the ID is 10. We have passive interfaces. Here, the array, the network, we can see the networks we are advertising from here. And as you can see, there's no difference between the configuration file, just that the output is different, okay, based on the data formats. And it's very important to understand this because when we go deep into using Postman, working with the APIs, we're going to understand why it's very important to programmatically configure these devices because I can run tests to pick key values from this output and run and use it in a different test. Unlike this text file, let's say if I want to use an IP address from here, I would have to, or maybe let's say I'm advertising a block. Okay, I can just pick the block from here, save it as a variable in Postman, and use it as the in my next request. But unlike here, we have text file. We have to configure everything. Although this is plain text, for us to understand. But the goal is when we get this, what can we do with it? And then once we have this, we can do so much with it. So I thank you for watching this video, and my subsequent videos will start with configuration using Postman and APIs. And then we will reference from here, then we apply the same, we reference from the text file, and then we apply the same thing to the Postman. But thank you for watching this video and see you in my next video. Bye.